another quick and fairly easy tutorial for today. Some bookmarks. So Christmas is coming, and sometimes books are often a really good Christmas gift idea. So you could make some bookmarks that you could personalise. Sorry, the light's not great. For an extra little something to add to the book that you're going to give. So for this, you're going to want some paper or card, and I would recommend that you use a watercolour paper, partly because it's thicker, so it gives you a nice finish, but more importantly, you want to have a paper that's going to take the paint, and watercolour paper is designed for that. So if you haven't got this and you just want to use a standard white card, you can, but what you might find is you have to be careful not to overload the paper with water and paint, and you might need to sit the finished article in between two big heavy books or something, and then you'll be able to flatten the card back out again. So if you can get a watercolour card paper, definitely worth it. You can easily buy it online, doesn't have to be expensive. This was a pack of an A5 spiral bound, and it only cost me a couple of pounds in Hobbycraft. The range often have a really good selection too. You need some watercolour paints. Now I've got proper watercolour paints, but you could just as easily use some children's water paints. They're exactly the same. The colours might not be quite as strong, but it's exactly the same thing. Depending on how you want to do your design, you'll possibly need some kind of tray or plate or something to use as a palette if you want to mix any colours. You'll need some paintbrushes. Now, if you're going to do the kind that I've done, it's just sort of fairly simple wash, then something that's got quite a big set of bristles probably works best. But equally, these are fantastic for kids to use. These are water brushes basically. They have a compartment inside, and you fill this section with water, and when you basically give it a gentle squeeze, it will squeeze some of the water out through the bristles of the brush, and you can almost go without the palette. It does mean you'll have to use your colours neat though. If you want to do something really detailed, then you'll need a finer brush, but the ones that we're going to do today, I'm just going to do a sort of a scene and do a wash over the top. And to create the effect, we're going to use a white crayon. If you've got a full-on painting kit, you might have a pot of masking fluid. You can get proper masking fluid, but most of you are not going to use that. So just a basic crayon. I'm going to use white because I don't want my designs that I'm going to make to actually show up as a colour. What I want it to do is just mask out. This one's not so easy to see, but this one's got lots of stars all over it. I want it to just mask out so that when I put the watercolour over the top, the paint won't take. The way I'm doing it is because I'm going to make a number of bookmarks out of one sheet. I'm using a tape. Now ideally, to help keep your paper in place, you'd use a piece of masking tape anyway, and use that to put around the outsides to some kind of surface or a board. You can just do it straight onto your tabletop, so long as you've obviously got something underneath to protect it. And then I've used extra pieces of masking tape to go across to mask off the areas. Now what this allows you to do is create this white border around the edge. So when you apply your masking tape around the outside to stick it to the board, if you keep the overlap of tape onto the card or paper the same all the way around, that will create a frame. And then these strips that have gone across the centre will create another part of the frame. So as long as that is more than twice this border that you want, what you should be able to do is make it so that it goes all the way around, creates your frame. And if you've got a little bit of excess in here, which I will do, when I did my first ones I had a little bit extra, you can cut those out. So these four here started off life as a single sheet, and I placed the masking tape in the opposite direction to the way I'm going to do now, and I just trimmed off the excess between the pieces, and I made sure that my overlap around the edge was fairly evenly spaced. You'll need a pot of water to go with your paints, and I'd probably suggest that you have some kitchen paper or something like that that you can use so that you can clean your brushes and mop up any mess. So have a think about what you want to do for your design. This one that I did in my first batch, I'm not sure how well it shows up, but there is a little Christmas tree and some stars in the sky. And I want to do the same thing on a couple of these, but doing them in the landscape orientation rather than portrait. So any area or design that you don't want coloured, or you want it to stand out from the colour, use your crayon. So I'm going to do a rough, not solid, but a rough squiggle of crayon to make a ground, and then I'm going to do some very rough tree shapes. And I'm not going to be able to see, but I'm not that worried about the precision. I just want to create the effect. So I'm going to do them in different sizes, and then over here I'm going to just do a big star, and there doesn't need to be any precision to this, so just go wild. You don't have to create a scene, and I'm going to do a few dots. It almost looks a little bit like snow. You don't have to do a scene, so that one, which you can't see at all right now, should just be a whole series of little trees and a star with some speckles. This one I'm going to do similar to one of the ones I did before. I'm just going to do a series of stars, or asterisks, because they're not technically proper stars. And then I'll put some dots. It's probably best not to go right up close to the very, very edge, because what you want to be able to do is have paint that comes along this edge so that it shows up your border, so you'll get a solid line of colour going all the way around the edge. And then my last one, I'm going to do a message. So this one's going to say happy reading. Okay, and that's really all you need to do. If you want to go with a really, really intricate design, it'll take a lot longer than I just did. And then here, the masking tape is going to act not only as a barrier to keep the paint from going over these areas that are covered up, but it's also going to allow you to use a different colour in each space. So you can go for a single colour over a complete, oops, need a bit more water, single colour over a complete area. And if you go fairly watery, not too watery that you end up soaking your paper through, you can get some fairly good coverage. And then if you want to add a little bit more colour, you can do so. One of the good things about the watercolour is that if you want to almost create a gradient effect, then if you give that a minute to dry, you can come back over an area again and the colour will be just more intense next time around. So I'm going to come back to that one in a minute. I'm going to let that dry for a second. This top one, I created a bit of a scene. So what I want, although I've got no definitive horizon level, what I want to do is I'm going to start by doing some green or greeny colour towards the bottom. Now the very bottom I did some swooshes of the crayon on the bottom, and what I want to do is I want to try and create a gradient. So what I'm going to do is my green paint that I've started off with, I'm going to add a tiny bit of blue into it, and that's what I'm going to do on my next. And you might be able to just see I've gone from a sort of darker murky-ish sort of greeny colour into a slightly more turquoisey blue, and then I'm going to go for something much more blue across the top. So I've created something of a ombre effect. Right, the last one, I'm going to go for something, so this one was a happy reading one, so I'm going to go for something quite dark. Let's go for a real deep red, so I'm going to go for this one here. There we go. So I said I'm going to go back to this one again. So when I did this, it's pretty, there is a little bit of wishy-washy to it, but what I'm going to do is just take a little bit more purple, and I'm going to just create a slightly darker shade to one side than to the other. So this one is just a solid colour. This one I've used a single coat and then gone over part of the area with another coat of the same colour, so I get slightly more ombre effect on one colour. And then here I've created a bit of a scene, and I've used multiple colours. And you don't have to sit there and sort of colour every individual little section in. A really quick wash straight over the top works really well. So really what you need to do is to let those dry. Now watercolour will dry really quickly, so you don't need to allow too long. But for these ones, I'll just while the others drying, these ones, if I want to make them into a bookmark for somebody to use, you might want to pop a hole punch in the top, or you might want to leave it the same. So this is my star one. I'm going to add a hole punch roughly in the centre, and then I could add a ribbon, or I've got lots of this stuff which came from my Poundland baubles. So if I take a length of one of these, if you've got wool or string or ribbon, there's so many things you could use, and these are quite a good length. So what I'm going to do is, actually I'm going to take a couple of these, I think, and what I'm going to do, just because I'm not going to use these for anything else, is I'm going to double them up, and if I feed my folded sort of centre point, whoops, mine are all a bit curly because they've been tied up together. Right, if I feed my centre point where it's folded through my hole, got one that doesn't want to go through, and then just pull the loose ends on this side through, knots itself, and then I've got a sort of a dangly end. What I'll probably do then is just take a pair of scissors and snip these to make sure they're all the same length. And there's my bookmark finish. If you want something a bit looser, this is quite thick stuff, just an ordinary ribbon or some wool or some decorative thread would work quite well, and you could tie a little knot in the end, make a little tassel on the end of that. So this is probably dry enough just about for me to just show you what you need to do next. So let yours dry properly. I'm just going to take away some of this excess wet paint that's on my tape. I think I'm picking up glitter from my table. So literally very, very slowly and carefully peel away your masking tape, and if you've got it pressed down nice and pretty tight along your paper, the paint won't have passed underneath it. You'll end up with a pretty nice straight edge that goes all the way around. So from here you can take yourself a pair of scissors or a craft knife and a ruler and cut along these lines so that you can separate them. Let's take my board out of the way. I can use my cutting mat that's underneath. So you can use scissors. I'm going to use, for speed, I'm going to use a ruler and a rotary blade. So I'm going to try and keep it straight and in line, or the sizing in line with what I've got around the rest of the card, so that when I've got the final finished thing, it hopefully looks like quite a nice neat border. And just going to trim these ones down so that these are the same on the other side. Mine are still very, very slightly wet in a couple of places, so you'd probably want to wait a little bit longer than this. And you might want to measure. I'm doing mine by eye really. But you can do the same again. You could pop a hole punch in one end of your bookmark and add a finish to it, just so that when it's in somebody's book they've got a piece that they can use to pull it out. Entirely up to you which size you go for. So my A5 pad of paper gave me 3 long bookmarks in landscape, and if I made my markings across, if I started with it in portrait orientation and then did my masking tape across it, I managed to get about 4. Mine aren't exactly the same size, but it's probably a reasonable size bookmark. You could change from a white crayon, and if you wanted something like these, so actually you wanted the trees to stand out, these would probably look quite good if you did the details in a coloured crayon that matched. So green for these. If you wanted to do the writing on a message, that would work quite well. Pick your watercolour so it perhaps contrasts rather than being the same as. I seem to have got glitter still in here from doing the baubles the other day, so maybe you could add some glitter. So all yours. And they might just be just a small gift to add to, like I say, a book, but possibly quite a nice idea for children to do. You could write a message on the back. You could do another watercolour design on the other side, but I think this would be quite nice if they were from children. If children made them and did a drawing on there, they make quite a nice little keepsake for grandparents or something, if you had a message as well on the back to say who it was from. So show me what you make.